Hi everybody, I'm going to kick us off. So everybody saying that they don't have sound yet, it's because there was nothing to hear, but now hopefully you have sound and can hear me. My name is Katie Jacobs from the CIPD. I'd like to welcome you to the latest in our series of coronavirus webinars designed to help support people professionals to support their organisations through the pandemic. Today we're talking about an issue that I know has been on a lot of people professionals' radar for some time, but is coming into greater focus thanks to the impact of the pandemic, and with Christmas just around the corner, it's financial well-being. How can employers support employees' financial wellness during this challenging period? Joining me to discuss a great panel, I'm joined by Charles Cotton. Charles is Senior Policy Advisor for Performance and Reward at CIPD. Karleen Dowden, Regional Partnerships Manager at the Money and Pension Service, and Sally Hopper, Assistant Director of HR at Hertfordshire County Council. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm just going to run through the housekeeping. The session is being recorded. You will be able to access it afterwards. We'll make it available from this afternoon. The slides will also be available. And I'd just like to flag that we asked Charles and Karleen to slim their slides down a little bit, or we'd never get through them all, but there was so much brilliant information there that we're going to make the whole deck available to download, so you'll be able to access some extra information that will not be coming in the presentation. To submit your questions, and please do submit your questions during the webinar, could I ask you to use the Q&A tab, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. But feel free to use the chat function if you want to talk to other attendees, or if you just want to share any points or comments. Remember that the CIPD Coronavirus Hub is there for you as a resource, and that we are adding things to it all the time. And for legal advice, remember that the CIPD members can call our HR Inform helpline. It's available 24/7, and you will get an individual response from an employment lawyer. So if you've got any tricky legal questions that you're struggling with right now, then remember that is available to you. And I also want to flag our Wellbeing helpline for members in the UK and Ireland. With award-winning workplace wellbeing provider Health Assured, we're now providing CIPD members with free help and support via sessions with qualified therapists that you can take online or over the phone. Apparently this is self-care week, so that is very appropriate to remember to take some time out to look after yourselves as you support others. So on to our topic. The impact of the pandemic has increased money worries for many working people. With many households relying on a reduced income or facing higher bills, we know from CIPD research that financial wellbeing has been impacted. According to our forthcoming reward management survey, almost 7 in 10 organisations feel their employees' financial wellbeing has got worse. Our research into the impact of COVID on working lives also found many workers reported a fall in their financial security, especially those who've been on furlough. But even before the pandemic, average worker pay has suffered. Since the 2008 financial crisis, average UK employee earnings have not grown as fast as inflation, and in real terms, that means that the average worker is taking a pay cut. Employee financial wellbeing has a real impact on productivity. Money worries impact employees' ability to do their jobs, which can lead to a vicious cycle, with employers then struggling to make the productivity gains they need in order to enable pay rises across the board. So what can people professionals do about it? How can you go about creating a financial wellbeing strategy in challenging times? That's what we're going to attempt to answer today over the next hour or so. First up, Charles is going to take us through some of the context. He's going to talk about the impact on work and the responses HR could try. Then Karleen will share the UK's strategy for financial wellbeing and a bit more information about what the Money and Pension Service offers. And then Sally is going to offer some practical and contextualised insight into what her team have been doing to support employees in the public sector, both before and after the coronavirus pandemic. So that is it from me for now. I will be back to run the Q&A, but also to go between speakers. But I'm going to hand over to Charles to take us through his presentation. Thanks, Charles.
Thank you very much, Katie, for that introduction. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So I'm going to be talking in my presentation about some research that the CIPD's done, looking at what the impact has been of COVID and the economic lockdown on employees. Then I'll touch on what the potential consequences could be of those, and then look at how organisations have been responding and how HR could look at this issue and what they could do to improve employee financial well-being. So the forthcoming reward management survey, which hopefully should be out in February next year, we did ask the respondents to say what impact COVID and the economic lockdowns had had on their on the finances of the organisation, and 80% said it was having a very negative effect. And then we also asked them to think, well, what impact could it be having on their employees? And 68% said that it was probably having a negative effect. But we've also been looking at it from the employee perspective. So if you look at the next slide, please, we have surveyed between April and August just around 7,400 employees. And one of the questions we asked was about their financial security. Had it improved or had it got worse? And as you can see, just over half of them said there had been no change in their financial security. But 35%, over 1 in 3 said it had got worse, and only about 14% had said it had improved. Now, if we kind of drill down into this, these figures a bit more, so the next slide looks at it by furlough, as Katie mentioned, you can see that those people who had been on furlough were far less likely to say that there had been no change in their financial security, only 38% that there had been no change, compared to those who hadn't been on furlough, that's 61%. And you can see how many people, well, the percentages, how many people were saying how much worse it was for them, or how slightly worse it was for them if they had been on furlough. Another way of analysing the data, if we look at the next slide, is those who've had a change in their caring responsibility. So for instance, during the lockdown, many of them, people working from home, were having to look after children, or possibly they had elder care responsibilities. And you can see those people who had changes in caring responsibilities were more likely to report that their financial security had deteriorated over this period. And the next slide, if we could look at that. This was looking at it by the potential consequences for employees. And this was based on some research we asked back in 2017. And the research indicated that those people who had money worries, it could result in them feeling tired because of lack of sleep, worrying about money issues, difficulty concentrating at work, or perhaps spending work time dealing with financial problems. And it could lead to poor physical and mental health. And around 1 in 4 workers who responded to our survey back then said that money concerns had affected their ability to do their job. So we can only imagine that proportion may have deteriorated since then. So the next slide, please. And there are consequences, not only, as we've just seen, for employees, but also for society and employers. So we've seen an increase in the risk of use of food banks. We've seen an increase in the risk of fraud, especially pension scams, and unfortunately a rise in domestic abuse and economic abuse, an increase in poor mental health. And of course, that has impact then for the employers in terms of poor workplace productivity, impacts on quality and service, also difficulties in terms of creativity and being innovative, and ultimately on the bottom line. So the next slide looks at how employers have been responding so far during the pandemic. And around a quarter of them that we had surveyed were exploring how their people had been impacted financially by COVID-19 and the economic crisis, such as through surveys or exit interviews. And another 18% were planning to do this by March 21. And 12% had, or in the process of introducing, a formal employee financial wellbeing policy. And that was on top of 31% already had a policy. But as the next slide shows, just under half of all respondents to our research didn't have a financial well-being policy. And when we asked them why, it was kind of creating one wasn't seen as a priority right now. And other more common explanations also were the organizations saw the need but just didn't have the time or the money or the expertise to create one. It wasn't sure if employees wanted it. and it wasn't convinced that having one would help with employees' well-being. So the next slide looks at what HR can do. So when we asked back in 2017 employees what was important to their financial well-being, we had a long list, but the four most common ones were earning a wage sufficient enough so they could enjoy a reasonable lifestyle, being able to save for the future, being rewarded for their efforts in a fair and consistent manner, and being able to comfortably pay off existing debts. And being paid enough and being paid fairly was something that was consistent across all demographics like age or gender, etc. So if you're going to focus on any two areas, I would focus on paying people enough and paying people fairly. Now, obviously, paying a livable wage, especially to key workers, is going to have cost implications. So, but if we can focus on improving employee productivity through job, work, and organizational redesign, then greater productivity should flow, which should help pay for higher wages. The next slide looks at it from a perspective in when we looked at the reward management survey this year, we did ask a question about what the benefits of being a living wage employer were. And it can bring benefits to organizations such as supporting the employer brand, improving employee engagement, supporting the customer brand, reducing employee turnover, and helping organizations bid for work. Now, the next slide looks at issues around pay fairness. I mean, in theory, paying people fairly shouldn't have cost implications for organizations, but for many, they're not starting with a clean sheet. So the first thing many companies will need to do is to kind of put resources into auditing legacy reward processes and outcomes to see, well, are there issues there when it comes to reward that we're unable to explain or justify? So if you're going to start talking about fair pay, you need to kind of put your house in order first. Similarly, you're going to have to invest in communication skills, especially if line managers are going to have a role talking about the reward offer and what people need to do to get it. Also, create a definition of what you mean by fair to help make and explain reward management decisions. The reward management survey for 2019, when we asked about this issue, many companies talked about pay fairness, but actually hadn't got round to creating a definition yet. Also, we need to invest in new systems in terms of, how jobs are valued, grades are created, and people progressed. And also investing in HR analytics capabilities. So we've got the systems in place so we can work out whether we actually are paying people fairly. And then my final slide looks at what HR could do quickly. One easy win is to improve employee financial capability through access to either in-house financial awareness programs, things like what benefit package you have on offer or how the pension scheme works, which could help employees, or signposting people to sources of information and help, such as the Money Advice Service, which is a neat segue into Karleen, who's the next speaker.
Yeah, it's almost like we planned it. Thanks, Charles.
Did.
Really great presentation there, full of brilliant information. As I said, there were even more slides, there's loads more information in there, so those will be available to download after the session. Please do get your questions in throughout, and I'll put them to the panel at the end. Do not do that thing where you all put your questions in when there's 5 minutes to go and then there is no time to answer them and people get annoyed. So I'm going to hand over to Karleen now to take us through her perspective.
Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you to the CIPD for inviting me along today. I have got a bit of an unstable connection today, so if you lose my video, don't worry, hopefully you'll still hear my voice. So I'm going to build on some of the themes of Charles's presentation, in particular the link between financial well-being and employee productivity, motivation and attendance. I'll briefly talk about the UK strategy for financial well-being and the fundamental role employees play in implementation, and then provide some information on what MAPS can offer in terms of supporting your employees. Next slide, please. So who are MAPS? MAPS are an arm's length organisation of DWP. We're funded through financial service levies, and MAPS has brought together 3 legacy brands, some of which you may have heard of. These are the Money Advice Service, the Pension Advisory Service, and PensionWise. And we're in the process of bringing together these brands under the umbrella of MAPS, and also rebranding our B2C services as Money Helpers, which will happen in the new year. We're the single biggest funder of debt advice in the UK, funding partners such as CIPD and Step Change. And we also fund one-to-one pension advice for the over 55s through PensionWise, which pre-COVID was done face-to-face, but is now being done by telephone appointments. The pension advice service is for anyone who wants to discuss pensions at any time, at any age. And we also work closely with the Treasury and Financial Conduct Authority and run a number of different pilots and evaluation to test what works in supporting financial capability and well-being. Okay, so what is financial well-being? So I'm glad to see that what Charles stated has been cited by employees in his presentation as the most elements of important elements of financial well-being are very similar to what our own definition is. So we can show it on the next slide. So how we define financial well-being is knowing you can pay the bills today, can deal with the unexpected, and are on track for a healthy financial future. If people have high financial well-being, then they should be secure, confident, and empowered. Every 3 years, we carry out a financial wellbeing survey to measure wellbeing across the UK. The next survey is due out early next year, and it'll be interesting to see what the results are following the impact of COVID. So what this slide here shows is the current state of play in relation to financial wellbeing, which is taken from the FinCap survey that I just mentioned. I think what's important to bear in mind that the data on this slide is pre-COVID, and unfortunately, but not unexpectedly, we're forecasting that the next FinCap survey results will be much bleaker. I think what's important to bear in mind that financial well-being goes beyond helping people to make better financial decisions. It's central to personal well-being and thus living a contented life. According to these pre-COVID figures, this is the current state of financial well-being in the UK, which are poor numbers for a leading economic nation. Furthermore, the poor state of our financial well-being has a real impact on the fabric of our communities and wider society. The importance of society made up of individuals that can manage their money cannot be underestimated. A financial healthy nation is good for individuals, communities, businesses, and the economies. I think one of the stark stats here is that 11.5 million people in the UK have less than £100 savings. As you can probably imagine, that throws up a multitude of problems when faced with unexpected expenses, such as a broken washing machine, or even expected costs, such as buying school uniforms, when every penny of weekly or monthly income is accounted for. So we can show the next slide. So echoing what Charles has said, money worries are the biggest cause of stress for UK employees and damaging to businesses too. The business case for supporting financial well-being at work is compelling. 94% of UK employees admit to worrying about money, and of these, 77% say that money worries impact them at work. 69% of UK employers believe their employees' job performance is negatively affected when they are under financial pressure. And 62% of UK employees believe financial well-being to be the responsibility of the employer. That's 6 in 10 employees. I always find that as quite a fascinating fact that actually that individuals are putting the onus on employers. I'm not sure, there's a great debate around that, but it's interesting to see how many do think it is the responsibility of the employer. Okay, next slide, please. So 1.56 billion is the estimated cost of low financial well-being each year as a result of absenteeism and presenteeism. The cost that poor financial well-being has on the UK economy includes 1.6 million employees taking time off work, costing approximately 478 million, and nearly 3 million employees struggling to focus at work at a cost of 516 million. A recent OECD report showed that the UK has some of the lowest levels of financial well-being. In response to trying to tackle the issue of poor financial well-being, the government tasked MAPS with developing a strategy, which I'm now going to briefly talk through. So the national strategy for financial wellbeing, in developing the strategy, it was quickly recognised that we would need to work with a wide range of stakeholders right across the country in order to deliver on the national targets set out within the strategy, employers being one of the key stakeholders. So the next slide shows the 10-year strategy, which includes the national goals. And as you'll see, there are 5 key pillars and agendas for change. The first being financial foundations, and this is really focused on 2 million more young people receiving some form of financial education. We know that early intervention can have big impacts later on life on making financial decisions, and that's why we've decided to focus on children and young people as part of the strategy. The second agenda for change, Nation of Savers, is focusing on increasing the amount of people saving by 2 million more by 2013. As I showed in the previous slide, 11.5 million people currently have less than £100 in savings, which can cause huge issues. And this links into the agenda for change around credit counts. We're trying to reduce the amount of people by 2 million people relying on credit for everyday purchases. What we know has been one of the biggest impacts on finances of COVID is people relying on credit for everyday purchases, such as putting petrol in the car to get to work or take the children to school, alongside using it for fuel within the house and shopping, weekly shopping, etc. What we're not saying is that all credit is bad, but it has its uses and its purposes, and relying on credit cards, etc. for everyday purchases is not a sensible financial decision. The fourth agenda for change is around better debt advice, and this is 2 million more people accessing debt advice. Currently, people leave it approximately 2 years before seeking any form of formal debt advice, by which time their financial situation is generally in dire states and it's much more difficult to resolve issues that they might have. And then the last agenda for change is around future focus. And this is the national goal of 5 million more people understand enough to plan for later life. There is a wealth of information out there, but how people use and process that information varies considerably. And what we do know is that we're at a cliff edge almost with people who have not made pension provision. Okay, next slide, please. So what I just want to finish briefly and quickly on is what MAPS can offer in terms of you as employers in supporting the financial wellbeing of your employees. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, all our services and support are completely free of charge and also are from government sources. So all our resources are regularly updated to make sure that they include all the latest guidance and information. So this slide shows briefly what we offer. So we have a library of online articles and videos, and we have thousands of these. These are currently housed on the Money Advice Service, and they range from everything about, what is a credit score, how can I reduce costs, cash flow situation, different types of mortgage, a wealth of articles and videos and blogs that are all on that website that can be accessed. And what they can also be used for is to syndicate on your own portals. So for example, if you have an intranet or a portal or an app that you use with your employees, all of that can be linked on to your own, or you can just share the links. We have a number of printed guides for you to share with your staff. You can order up to 3,000 per organisation on these. Unfortunately, the most popular guide at the moment is our redundancy booklet. We have a suite of guidance tools and calculators, which people can put in their financial situation in. Our Money Navigator tool is a really popular one at the moment. It's to calculate changes to income due to COVID and factors in things like mortgage holidays, credit card holidays, and it gives an analysis at the end of that person's financial situation, and then refers and signposts them to the appropriate person where they can seek support through different services. We offer free pension support, bespoke appointments for the over 55s, which are our appointments about their particular situation. And of course, we've got our customer guidance support via phone and web. So if you go on our website, it's got the telephone numbers of those services. And if nothing else, as an employer, what I would be saying is that have these as a signposting tool for your employees so that they do know where to go should they seek money and pensions advice. We also have a number of programs and pilots where we run a number of evaluations. If you're interested in getting involved in any of those, please do get in touch. And we do offer maps and speakers for any events and things that you might be running, but that is subject to kind of availability and capacity. And all this is supported by a local regional partnership manager. I'm actually the partnership manager for the North East, but there are 9 others of me across the country, which are shown on the next map on the next slide, sorry. Oh no, it's not, it's the slide after, apologies, we'll come to that in a bit. This slide briefly just shows all of the different types of topics that we cover. So all those resources and tools and calculators that I mentioned, these are the types of topics that they're on. I haven't yet found a piece of, well, I haven't identified any guidance that we've been asked for that we don't currently have, although there's a couple that we're doing updates to, for example, the section around apprenticeships and apprentices in relation to COVID. Thank you. This is the map I mentioned. All of these, the email and contact details can be found on our employer page, the link of which is on the last slide. So if you're looking to be linked to the person within your local region, please get in touch. And on the last slide, at the bottom there, that link will take you through and you'll be able to contact those individuals. And also that's the link to our employer page, which has got further details of ways of supporting you in developing a financial wellbeing strategy, or the tools and resources available through the Money and Pension Service. Thank you.
Thank you, Karleen. And you've answered somebody's question, which is, can they access your services in Scotland? But the answer is yes.
And Wales and Ireland.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That was really brilliant overview, and I'm sure a lot of that information people will be jumping on to offer their staff, given that it's all free and available. I'd like to hand over to Sally. Sally's just going to talk for a few minutes to give a bit of insight about what they've done at Hertfordshire County Council, about why she thinks this is an important issue, and kind of what's changed pre and post COVID. Over to you, Sal.
So thank you, Katie, for the chance to join, and really good links into what I've got to say from Charles and Karleen. So pre-COVID at Hertfordshire County Council, we had linked financial wellbeing very much to our overall wellbeing strategy, and we saw it very much as a key part of our employee assistance programme. And we introduced a salary finance scheme because we felt that that was very important as part of our offer and our education to the workforce on financial wellbeing. And the salary finance scheme, in essence, does provide opportunities for employees to make savings, and it also provides opportunities for them to get loans. And why we thought that was important, because there's a lot of ethics around that before we made that decision, but we thought it was important because we were very aware that on the high street, payday loans are very, very easy to access and very hard to pay off often. So we were very keen to do a loans scheme so that employees could access loans that were not those high interest rates. And that's something that's gone down very well. And when you think about what Karleen said about many people not having access to more than £100, if the employee has got a washing machine going wrong, as Karleen mentioned, that's on their mind, and that's a big deal for people if they haven't got the money to replace it. So we saw our payday, going away from the payday loans model to our more pay salary loans, a better way of doing things and helping our staff. We also can't do any of this on our own, so we work very closely with the Money Advisory Unit and the Citizens Advice Bureau, and we do signpost all of our staff to those agencies to help them to make sense of their financial well-being. The sorts of things we've also done is, Katie mentioned Christmas in her introduction, and we have introduced a couple of years ago a platform where staff can save money, anything from £5 to £200 a month towards Christmas. And that doesn't accrue interest for them, but it does help them to plan for that expensive time of year for a lot of people. And I think the other thing to mention as well is that we very much have life-changing experiences, all of us, at times, and this is seeking to help people through that, because we do believe that there is, obviously, as already been mentioned this afternoon, a very strong link between well-being, financial well-being and mental health well-being. And all of this is brought together on our Hearts Rewards platform, which is an employee reward platform. And the reason that platform is very important is it has become a one-stop shop for a number of things. And on the platform, staff can enjoy a range of discounts on shopping. And this is really trying to do nothing more than making their money go a bit further. And that's very favourable. And just last year, we reckoned that we saved employees cumulatively saved over £1 million through savings, through using Hearts Rewards. So that sort of thing can help your employees to make their money go a bit further and should be welcomed. And then when we think about post-COVID, a constant part of our communications and employee engagement has paid attention to financial well-being. We saw very early on that this is very important that we pay attention to that. So every time we push out a well-being message, we also include a whole feature on financial well-being. And what we've noticed post-COVID is we've become much more aware that our thoughts and our support to our employees go way beyond the employee, because the employee's loved one, family member, or maybe someone they're renting with, who they are depending on, could have lost their job, been furloughed, facing redundancy and uncertainty. So post-COVID, we have been very keen to start that conversation with our workforce, to acknowledge that conversation and pay great attention to the fact that we see, for our whole economy around us, people are very much suffering at the moment. And I think the other thing to sort of end on really from me is, why does any of this matter? Well, anyone on the call who cares about their employee well-being, and I hope that's everyone on the call, should also know that they can only do that if they pay attention to financial well-being, because the two are intrinsically linked. And also 30% of our staff in Hertfordshire County Council are carers. So Charles mentioned the fact that it can more adversely affect carers, and we have more than 30%, so it was worth paying attention to. And then it is absolutely apparent to me that if somebody is worrying about money for the reasons that we've heard today, they won't be focusing on their job. So you won't be getting such a productive employee, and it could affect their overall mood. So these are all the reasons why within Hertfordshire County Council we paid attention to financial well-being and it being so high up on our agenda. So thank you, Katie.
So I've done the one thing that I always tell other people not to do, which is remember to unmute yourself before you talk. We didn't have any slides for Sally, but perhaps somebody's just asked, could you run through just very quick, like kind of point by point, the various offerings? So you've got loans, employee reward platform. Are there any kind of suppliers that you would recommend? Maybe you could just take us through them again.
Yeah, so there are other models available, but we use Reward Gateway for our Hearts Rewards. So we've got a platform where all of our offers are on that platform for staff to access. We also have a Christmas savings scheme, which doesn't accrue interest. We also have a salary finance partnership with loans available, and also an opportunity for employees to get financial advice, obviously regulated, but financial guidance and signposting, and also financial well-being and an opportunity to save as well. The other offer we've got is just constantly on the agenda. So any wellbeing message I send out, it very rarely doesn't pay attention to finance. And great, easy, quick wins, signposting people to where they might get help. So organisations like Karleen, it's there, this information is there, all the great resources Karleen mentioned, signposting to people to that because they may not necessarily realise it exists. We've made it okay to talk about finance because as a society, I think it's something we don't talk about. So hopefully that's a bit of a run through, but I'd be very happy to share more details that we can circulate perhaps.
Thank you. Just one more question about what you actually, the practicalities. Who do you use for your Christmas savings scheme?
So that's part of our Hearts Rewards platform. So we just take it out of Payroll Direct and we put it into the platform, and then you get it, you save from January to September, and in October you get a nice surprise.
Brilliant, thank you. Great, I'm going to come to Q&A. We've had a few questions in. Please do keep submitting them. Can I ask Charles and Karleen to unmute themselves so we don't end up with you doing what I just did and talking while you're on mute? I got a question, somebody, Anna, who says that she works with a relatively young workforce in hospitality. And she references your work, Karleen, and says Maps looks great. Do you have any recommendations specifically aimed at young people? So perhaps if I put that to you first, Karleen, and then maybe Charles and Sally can come in on. So Sally, I know you've got loads of apprentices. So Karleen.
Yeah. So there we have a lot of resources. The ones I would suggest, there are too many to mention, but some of the ones I would suggest are around the kind of budgeting, cash flow, understanding my pay slip. So I think what's really important is that employers are with different people through different life stages, you know, whether that be buying their first house or having their first baby, etc. But for young people, I think it's often the kind of, you know, maybe they're one of their first jobs, they've got their money there, but actually then they're frittering it away. They're not even thinking about for the future because a pension just seems too far away. So the ones I'd probably recommend are under the kind of cash and budgeting, which are ways of kind of cutting back on costs, saving money, prioritizing spending, and then possibly ones around the kind of mortgages and property, around preparing to save for a deposit for a house or for a rental property, and thinking about independent living. So when you buy a property, you've got all of those costs that go alongside that in terms of paying the bills, etc. So we've got a wealth of articles and resources on that. As I just mentioned as well, we are developing our resources around for apprentices. So we recognise that actually many apprentices were furloughed, and 80% of a relatively low wage is an even lower wage. So we've got a lot of resources and things that are in the pipeline to support apprentices. So if you've got apprentices, there's going to be a unique section on that. Also alongside for maybe those who have been graduates from university, so there's stuff around kind of student finance and paying off your loans, etc. So yeah, and if we've got, what I can send out as well is we've got a, say if you're trawling through the website, we've got a spreadsheet with every one of our resources listed, which we can share as well, and then you can kind of look to which ones might be appropriate.
Brilliant, thank you. And Charles, are you aware, do people access different things at different life stages? Is there different kind of interest at different ages? How can employers engage younger people?
I think there's a role for government to begin with, to talk about financial well-being in schools, colleges, universities, to help encourage good saving habits, investment habits and spending habits then. But given that isn't happening at the moment so much, then there is an issue for government to talk, for employers to talk about, well, once you start your work, this is a pay slip, this is your income, this is why it kind of disappears, you know, gets smaller, and these are the benefits that are on offer. This is how you can actually use your money better, you know, through different types of spending options. You could go through the organization, this is how you can budget. So yeah, there's lots of great opportunities for employers to engage with young people. I suppose there's issues around how they consume technology as well, and how you attract their attention. So things like apps and modelers will be quite important for this age group as well.
And Sally, have you got any practical tips? I know that you've got a lot of apprentices.
Yeah, I think the practical tips I could offer is talking about it. I know it sounds very basic, but starting the conversation at a very early stage with younger employees, and because sometimes they wouldn't necessarily see that as something they would naturally comfortably talk about, but I think something there about managing your salary, getting your first paycheck and knowing that that has to last till the next one, and just helping them through that to get some financial budgeting tips on is a good thing. I think education is very important, so I would always welcome anything that we can do throughout the person's life from very early on to educate on financial well-being, because I think it does help. I was talking to a young colleague not that long ago and talking about a rainy day fund, and they didn't kind of get what that meant at all. So I think there are some things that we take for granted that we know perhaps have as we go through our life experience of managing our own budgets, that younger people don't necessarily have had that opportunity to learn about. So I do think it is about signposting them. I do think it's about making their money go a bit further. So we have got an app, for example, for our Hearts Rewards, which was very important in terms of engaging them and getting them to buy into that scheme.
Thank you. A question from Philip. He says, we know that stress has a profound impact on an individual, and even those who tick all the boxes around financial well-being with savings still experience high levels of anxiety and stress. Given this is the case, what does everyone believe needs further action to promote a kind of more holistic approach to financial well-being? Charles, can I put that to you first? Any thoughts?
Well, obviously, just focusing on financial well-being and not on other factors that can reduce people's feelings of mental or physical well-being is only part of the picture. You've got to think about the whole thing. So I think it's important to, as Philip has suggested, to take a holistic approach, and that kind of looking at all the different kinds of stresses and strains that can arise, not necessarily through money issues, but through work or outside home issues at the home. The research that the CIPD commissioned back in 2017, that was conducted on our behalf by IES, found that if you had, well, not only did money worries cause mental stress, but if you already had, if you were suffering from mental stress anyway, then you were more likely to make poor financial decisions, which then would create a negative feedback loop. So talking about what Sally had just mentioned about openness, I think organizations should also think about what they can do to destigmatize in their organizations issues around money concerns and people feeling that, you know, that they feel ashamed to talk about money, or they feel that they're going to be judged. And I think an opportunity for organizations to focus on line managers and encourage the line managers to have conversations with their employees in a non-judgmental way and say, well, I'm not a financial expert, but these are where I would go to get more information and support, and that might include HR department as well.
And Sally, you've got a very holistic approach. Was that kind of a no-brainer, or is it something that's developed over time?
Yeah, I think it has developed over time for sure. And I think it is something there around being able to talk about it and thinking about what's going on externally outside of your organisation, and thinking if that's going on externally, there's a high chance that that's affecting my colleagues. So what can we do to open up the conversation and support them? And I think that sometimes other things can disrupt somebody's financial stability. So I mentioned in my brief summary about, you know, the wider context of their family or loved ones. So I think it is, people can very quickly go from financial stability to financial instability. So I think having the on your agenda in terms of your employee offering is very important.
Thank you. Karleen, can you offer advice on where to begin when developing a financial policy? So Charlene has said, my organisation is a small charity with very limited resources. We've just launched our wellbeing strategy, which includes looking at financial wellbeing. So if you're a small organisation just starting out on this journey, have you got any tips on how to set yourself up right?
Yeah, well, firstly, I would, it's a plug here for the CIPD, because they've got two very helpful documents which are just on there. It's developing financial wellbeing strategy, which can be applicable to any type of organisation, whether you be kind of a small charity or a big corporate international. So I would look at those documents. But in terms of a real starting point, I think it's around identifying the needs of your employees. So what is it that, is this something that they are interested in? There's an appetite for being supported in. And part of the problem with that is what Sally mentioned around that stigma around talking about money. Actually, it was Talk Money Week last week. I don't know if anyone noticed that or seen that, but it was really provided a platform to encourage people to start talking about money. But yeah, I would say identifying the needs of your employees and then looking at developing some sort of program that that meets those needs. And that doesn't need to be something that is very resource intensive or costs a lot of money. In fact, there are lots of organizations and resources and providers out there that will come in and talk about things. And yeah, there's an offer, for example, from lots of financial services, many of which have got their interest is hitting their CSR responsibilities rather than selling bank accounts. So I would look at what's free and what's available out there. And of course, I'm going to say this, I would look at what resources we have available, all those articles and blogs. And a good starting point really is raising awareness of what financial well-being is among staff. So whether that be communicating through your regular channels, whether it's a weekly newsletter, whether it's on the shop floor, a board that you put notices and things. So I would start by maybe just thinking of things that might be relevant now to people's circumstances. So our Money Navigator tool is an excellent starting point for people, starting that communication with employees to identify what they need and then building the programme around that.
Thank you. That was a very comprehensive answer, but I will just ask Charles if you've got any other advice on where to start, especially if you're a small organisation with limited resources.
Well, as Karleen was kind enough to mention, the CIPD does have a resource on its website, and recently we supported the National Forum as well, who also produced a report looking at how small employers could think about introducing a financial well-being program. So yeah, I'd recommend going to the CIPD website and looking at the support we've got there. What I would say is that one of the challenges is trying to get senior management buy-in, and there I think it can be more of a kind of a cultural thing. So you've got to kind of encourage your senior managers to put themselves in the shoes of people who are facing financial difficulty or have got poor financial well-being, and hopefully once they kind of start to understand the lived experience, then they may be more amenable. I mean, you would hope that all the kind of the data that we've shown or we've been talking about recently may encourage them to go down this approach anyway. But often it can be the personal things that can also tip certain key members of the senior management team to supporting such initiatives.
Well, thank you. I'm sure the time has kind of never been more pertinent than it is right now, really, for getting that buy-in. Jennifer asks if anybody's got experience or knowledge of implementing a platform like WageStream. So WageStream, I believe, is one where you can draw down your salary early before it gets paid. What is your opinion on this type of offering? So Sally, I know you mentioned you've kind of worked through the ethical issues of allowing people to access money early, perhaps. How have you found that experience, and what kind of challenges did you work through in getting to that point?
Yeah, so I haven't experienced WageStream, I'm afraid, but when we thought about the loan scheme, we were thinking through the challenges we were thinking through was absolutely started with the ethics of it, balanced against the reality of the high percentage loan rates that people can encounter through payday high street loans. And we had to do a lot of stakeholder engagement before we got approval to introduce the loans, for reasons I'm sure you'll understand, and also bring the unions with us as to why this was a good idea. So it was a long, it didn't happen overnight. It did require quite a lot of thought and consultation. I would be a bit cautious about drawing down the wages, because it could lead to a spiral of detriment. So that would need to be thought through carefully as well. And when we got to think about the loans, one of our key considerations was the risk for us. Who does the risk sit with, and also the risk for the employee. Would they be overstretching themselves? And that's why when we procured the provider called Salary Finance, again, others are available out there, but they are called Salary Finance. We very much did that with great care to make sure that we were really looking out for our employees and not doing anything further to sort of potentially put them into peril when they already are having financial worries. But I do think that this was helpful, because we were seeing not a huge number, but nonetheless, employees asking for salary advances, which I suppose is similar to WageStream, which we were consistently saying no to. And this way we felt it kind of addressed that question that was emerging from employees, that they could consider the loan instead. So I would always, my advice would be is to listen to sort of what Karleen's saying about accreditation, you know, going with making sure you're going with the accredited bodies, and also think through get references on them, you know, do your research and make sure that you're content that what they're bringing into your organisation is the right thing for you.
Thank you. And Karleen, do you or MAPS in general have views on those kind of tools, because they are becoming quite popular? I'm hearing quite a lot of people using them or considering using them.
Yeah, so we don't endorse any kind of financial service or product. I think it's really down to the individual organisation. You know, as Sally said, they thought about the ethics behind it, their responsibility as an employer. What, you know, you need to take a judgment call on, you know, your staff best, you know, the demographics, etc. You know, I had a conversation with a big NHS trust recently on their kind of salary sacrifice scheme. So where they can now people can get cars, they can go to Currys and get 52-inch TVs, etc. And people can just come and request these salary sacrifice. And what they now do is, despite being a huge employer, they look at every individual request. So they have someone come through wanting, you know, additional credits to buy something from PC World as an impressive Christmas present for their daughter, yet they could see that they were already having a huge proportion of their salary going out for other payments in terms of car payments, etc. And they made the decision, although it's a policy to have everyone to have access, they made that decision to not grant that. And they had that sit down conversation with that lady and said, you know what, is this the best decision to make you, you know, if your financial situation? So I think it is really kind of down to the organisation to know their staff. And it's not, you know, it's not about doing a credit check on your staff, etc., but it's about being sensible and being responsible.
Thank you. Another question from Melissa. Given the disparity between the cost of accommodation in London and average starting salary, how can we really realistically help people with their financial well-being? I mean, Charles, that's a really great challenge, isn't it? If you're working somewhere where the cost of living is very high, is there anything realistically an employer can do if the starting salary is not that high?
Well, it's interesting because earlier in the lockdown, people were talking about what would happen to things like London waiting if people could now work from anywhere for an organisation. Would these be on their way out? And many of the people who responded to our reward management survey, they are looking at whether they still need to pay people more to live in places like London and Edinburgh, which are more expensive, because actually they can work from anywhere. For those organisations that do need people to be based and working in London, I suppose, such as hospitals, schools, etc., then it's a case of what can they do to help deal with the cost of, you know, accommodation, with the cost of travel, and other related costs. Now, some of those things you can do through season ticket loans and helping to spread the cost there. There's a big push at the moment to encourage people to use bikes as well. So perhaps unsurprisingly, our survey found a big surge of organisations looking at the Cycle to Work scheme. Accommodation can be harder. I mean, I know that some of the big professional service firms, tech firms, have bought accommodation, I suppose halls of residence for their new workers and their young workers who are starting out in their career, and providing them with accommodation for a year or so to get them set up. But further time, I think the only way that organisations can deal with this is through, you know, paying more money to reflect the, you know, the higher costs of accommodation. But also, you know, it's not just employers. Government also has a role, and they need to start thinking about what they can do to boost the availability of accommodation in these areas, so that people don't find that so much of their money is taken up by accommodation and commuting costs.
Thank you. And this is something we were talking about earlier in the pre-call, and I know it's a little bit of a hot and contentious topic, but we're getting a lot of questions in. I know a lot of HR teams are dealing with the fact that people working at home are asking for more contribution to stuff like perhaps not quite accommodation, but household bills, heating, broadband, that kind of thing. And Sally, as a practitioner, what has been your approach to what more? I mean, you do an awful lot already, but I'm sure being asked for more.
Yeah, this was an inevitable question, wasn't it? As people work from home now, coming up for what I think is 9 months, you know, where does this sit in terms of the employee offer and the reward strategy? And I think my response to this is, speaking in public sector context, is look around, look out and beyond at what's going on in the current economic position. And lots of people are facing job uncertainty, redundancy, maybe furlough, with further uncertainty that brings for individuals. And if we spend money on that in the public sector I'm speaking for, then, i.e. giving allowances, then what does that mean to, where will that money come from? You know, so I would encourage everybody to think about that, because it could lead to other, you know, on the giving in one hand and taking in another if we're not careful. So I think that there's also been a very emerging narrative on this, with two sides really. One is, you know, what allowances might we pay? And the other is, goodness me, I've saved a lot of money working more remotely. So, you know, one hasn't had so much clothing costs or petrol costs. And so I think, you know, overall, I'm not sure any research has been done on it, but I think they kind of balance each other out. So our intention, I think, across the public sector is, we are, you know, absolutely up against it with continued financial pressures, and we have to think of the public purse. So our intention is not to make a move on that, but also to ask everyone to think through the wider context of some of our colleagues and community members who are perhaps without a job. So we're trying to look at it in a more ethical manner.
Thank you. I don't know, Charles, are you aware that many organisations are taking a different approach, or is it still too early to tell?
Well, it's probably too early to tell, but you know, we'll be looking at these trends and developments and reporting on them, you know, as well as the implications for practice.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap it up there because I'm afraid we're out of time. I'd like to thank Charles, Karleen and Sally very much for joining us this afternoon. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and for those of you that put in some really thoughtful and interesting questions, thanks very much for your engagement. A reminder that this webinar will be available on demand from later today, I think, or possibly tomorrow, and also a reminder that you will be able to access the slides, and there's just so much great information in that slide deck. So do look out for that on the CIPD website soon. We don't have a webinar next week. We're going to be back on December the 3rd. And in that session, we're going to be looking at how employers can support staff for the long haul, especially those who might be suffering from the symptoms of long COVID. So we hope to see you then. But that is it from us for now. Have a great afternoon, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.